Georgia has been so close the past 2 seasons. Can they finally break through and win the national championship in 2019? Find out here on the Gridiron Expert.
Yeah.
In just 3 years at Georgia, Kirby Smart has put together a very impressive resume. A 32-10 combined record, 2 SEC championship appearances, winning one of them, and a national title appearance. But the question remains, when will they be able to beat Alabama? As we all know, 2 years ago, the Bulldogs fell in the national championship game to Nick Saban and the Crimson Tide. And last year, in an SEC championship game that pitted 2 top 5 teams, the Bulldogs narrowly fell 35-28, which prevented them from getting into the college football playoff and put them in the Sugar Bowl, where they fell to Texas. The Bulldogs are hungry to beat Nick Saban and the mighty Crimson Tide, and maybe 2019 is the year they can do it. The Bulldogs returned 6 offensive starters, including one of the best quarterbacks in the entire nation in Jake Fromm. He threw for over 2,700 yards last year, 30 touchdowns, and just 6 interceptions. He returns one of the best running backs in the entire SEC in DeAndre Swift, who rushed for over 1,000 yards, 10 touchdowns, and averaged 6.4 yards per carry in 2018. The only question that Georgia has on offense is at the wide receiver position. They lose their top 5 wide receivers after the announcement of Jeremiah Holloman being dismissed from the team. So Jake Fromm is going to have to quickly build chemistry with this fairly new slate of wide receivers. But also, not to mention, their offensive line will be one of the best in the nation as well. I expect Fromm to build that chemistry fairly quickly. The running game will still be potent behind that offensive line. The offense won't have an issue at all. And the same can be said for their defense. You would expect a dominant defense from a Kirby Smart-led team, and that's exactly what you're going to get. They returned 6 starters this year from a unit that allowed just 19.2 points per game in 2018. They returned 4 of their top 5 tacklers, and 72.9% of their tackles overall returned from 2018. This Georgia defense will once again be one of the best in the SEC and probably one of the best in the entire nation. They open up the season right out of the gate in SEC play on the road against Vanderbilt. But Georgia has won the past 2 against Vanderbilt by a combined score of 86-17. This defense might have their hands full a little bit against a very powerful running game led by Keyshawn Vaughn, who nearly averaged 8 yards per carry in 2018. But Vanderbilt's breaking in a brand new quarterback in Riley Neal, the transfer quarterback from Ball State. And while I do like their core of wide receivers, their defense isn't enough to stop this Georgia offense, and their offense is not enough to go up against this Georgia defense, at least not yet. They're not going to be ready in week 1. Even though this game is on the road, I expect the Bulldogs to take fairly easy care of Derek Mason and his Commodores. They are 1-0 to kick off the season, 1-0 in SEC play, and we automatically have them now at 3-0 with easy wins over Murray State and Arkansas State. And then September 21st, that is the game that I think everybody has circled on their calendar, the game against Notre Dame. The last time these two teams met was just back in 2017, Georgia going on the road to South Bend and winning in a thriller, 20-19. Notre Dame was a college football playoff team last year. We cannot dismiss that. And while everybody likes to hate on the Fighting Irish, saying that they can't win the big games, they're unable to win the big games under Brian Kelly, this team still has the potential to get back to their second straight college football playoff. They bring back Ian Book at quarterback, and he has a very, very talented crew at the wide receiver position. That's obviously an edge at wide receiver that Notre Dame has over Georgia. But is Notre Dame's defense ready to go up against this potent Georgia offense? Are they ready to tackle the atmosphere and the environment that will be in Athens? It's going to be a night game on CBS, prime time, and I don't think Notre Dame's going to have enough to go on the road and beat the Bulldogs this season. I just don't see it. They fell 2 years ago, and while this game will be close, Georgia's not going to blow them out of the water. I don't think Notre Dame wins this game. Expect it to be very similar to that game we saw just a few years ago, but the Bulldogs win yet again over Notre Dame, a college football playoff contender, and they are 4-0. They then get a bye week on September 28th, and that's a perfect bye week for them because they go on the road to Tennessee to kick off October. And a lot of people have this pegged as the trendy upset pick for the Bulldogs, that the Volunteers in year 2 under Jeremy Pruitt are going to upset Georgia in Knoxville. And I'm here to tell you that's not going to happen. It is not going to happen. While Tennessee will be much more improved in year 2 under Jeremy Pruitt, they are still very young. They returned 10 starters offensively, 6 starters defensively. So a lot of experience returns, but it's young experience. I like Jarrett Garantano at quarterback. I think he's going to put up some numbers in this game against the Bulldogs. And Neyland Stadium is going to be rocking in this game, looking to avenge that 41-0 shutout they had the last time they visited, and then, of course, that 38-12 loss that they were handed to last year when they visited Athens. Both teams are coming off a bye in this game. Tennessee will be more hyped for it, no doubt in my mind, but Georgia, way too much talent, way too much experience. They beat the Volunteers, maybe closer than it was 2 years ago, maybe closer than it was last year, that 38-12 victory. But Georgia does get the win, and that trendy upset pick, not going to happen. They then get the October 12th matchup against South Carolina, and that was my trendy upset pick last year. In week 2, I thought at Williams-Brice Stadium with a very improved South Carolina team, maybe they could catch the Bulldogs early in the season and get a win. And, of course, Georgia proved me wrong, beating the Gamecocks 41-17. They dominated that game from start to finish. But 2 years ago, last time South Carolina visited Athens, they only fell 24-10. The Gamecocks did. And I can see this game being very similar to the one that we saw 2 years ago in 2017. This is one of Will Muschamp's best teams yet since he took over at South Carolina. But you're not going to see that much improvement this season because South Carolina faces the toughest schedule in the entire nation. But Jake Bentley, in his final year as quarterback for the Gamecocks, an offense that once again owns the edge at wide receiver over Georgia, has a dominant running back in Rico Dowdle, and probably the best defense that Muschamp has had since he arrived about 5 years ago. I think South Carolina hangs with Georgia for the most of this game. But home field advantage and, of course, a bigger strength on offense and certainly on defense gives Georgia the edge in this one. They beat South Carolina by at least 10 points, but in the grand scheme of things, that's not that big of a margin of victory. But Georgia wins this game. They're 6-0. So congratulations, Georgia's going bowling, but of course, that's not what they had their eyes set on in 2019. They then get a game against Kentucky on October 19th, and last year, when they visited Lexington, that was the game that was going to decide who would win the SEC East. That was basically the SEC East championship game. And Georgia went on the road and beat Kentucky 34-17, holding that dominant rushing attack led by Benny Snell to just 84 rushing yards. Once again, as we all know, Benny Snell is gone for Kentucky. Josh Allen, the anchor for that defense last year for the Wildcats, is gone. So Kentucky will have to rely more on the passing game. And Terry Wilson did not impress me last year with his passing game. I think it improves in 2019, but not enough to come on the road and beat Georgia, not in Athens. Kentucky's 10-win season last year, it wasn't a fluke. They're going bowling again in 2019, no doubt in my mind. It might be barely, but they're going to get there. Mark Stoops isn't going to let this team not go bowling in 2019. A lot of people don't have them doing that. But one of those wins that's going to get them to bowl eligibility will not come on the road against Georgia. The Bulldogs remain undefeated, 7-0, a quality win over the Wildcats. And then the final month of the season, so their final 5 games in November, that is what will define Georgia's season. That will be what defines their regular season. They're obviously the favorites in the SEC East. It's Georgia, Florida, and then just about everybody else. But whether or not they want to remain highly ranked, want to remain in contention for the college football playoff, it will be decided here in November. And we'll start with this Florida game, the big-time rivalry game. Both teams coming off a bye into this one. Last year, Florida was leading Georgia by 1 point, 14-13. But Georgia ended up storming back and winning 36-17 down in Jacksonville to win their second straight against the Gators. Expect this game to be much more competitive in 2019. Felipe Franks will take another major step forward in year 2 under Dan Mullen's offense, and I think he will give this Georgia defense quite a bit of a test in 2019. Florida's defense will be one of the best in the entire SEC. So you might see this game being relatively low scoring, much like it was for about the first half last year before Florida let up and Georgia ran away with it. So this game could be, I would expect, somewhere in the 20s. I don't know if either team will exceed 30 points. They have potent offenses, but I think their defenses are both a little bit better. But in the end, Florida, once again, isn't quite there yet. They will be competitive. They are Georgia's biggest threat in the SEC East, no doubt in my mind. But they're not going to have enough this year. Georgia gets another win over their rival, the Gators, for their 3rd straight over Florida. They then get Missouri at home, back in Athens. And if this game was in Columbia, I think I would be picking that as my trendy upset pick. I'd pick the Tigers to upset Georgia because they added Kelly Bryant in at quarterback. They're going to have their best defense, I think, that Barry Odom has ever had entering his 4th year with the Tigers. And their offense all the way around is going to put up some big-time numbers in 2019. That's not all due to Kelly Bryant. That's a big part of it. But Larry Roundtree and that crew of wide receivers are extremely talented as well. Expect this game once again to be close throughout the first half, kind of like this Florida game was last year. Georgia pulls away late. Their defense forces Kelly Bryant into enough mistakes. If he can't develop more as a passer, which he struggled spreading the field at Clemson, then he's going to struggle against this elite defense in Georgia. And I think that's exactly what happens. Georgia gets the win over Missouri, and with just 3 games remaining, they are undefeated. Obviously, in college football playoff discussion, they're going to be up there in the top 5, no doubt. But if you look at this remaining 3 games, 2 are on the road, at Auburn, at Georgia Tech, and then Texas A&M, who has a lot of talent this year, but like South Carolina, faces one of the toughest schedules in the entire nation. We'll start with this Auburn game. And this is my trendy upset pick. That is my upset pick for Georgia. And if you look at Georgia's schedule, I do not think they're going undefeated with this schedule. I do not think it's going to happen. 2 years ago, they fell on the road to Auburn. Last year, they fell on the road to LSU. So they've lost 2 games the past 2 seasons in the regular season and still been just fine. I think they slip up somewhere in the season. I think they fall to Auburn. And while I don't have high expectations for the Tigers this year, they have one of the best defensive lines in the entire nation. Going up against a dominant offensive line in Georgia, this game will be won in the trenches. And Georgia certainly owns the advantage at running back with DeAndre Swift. But listen to this stat. Georgia, going into this Auburn game, will have faced Florida coming off a bye, Missouri coming off a bye, and Auburn coming off a bye. 3 straight teams coming off a bye week, and I expect these Florida-Missouri games to be hard-fought victories for the Bulldogs. I think Auburn, especially Gus Malzahn, will be fighting for his job every single week, and once they find themselves a quarterback, could potentially be dangerous in 2019. Their defense gets the job done in this game, holds Georgia to a small amount of points, much like they did a few years ago when they annihilated Georgia in the regular season before the Bulldogs got their revenge in the SEC title game. And the Tigers upset Georgia at Jordan-Hare Stadium. Bulldogs take their first loss of the season. And once again, I don't have high expectations for the Tigers this season, but rivalry games, coming off a bye week, the defensive line, and the offense continually getting better through the course of the season by November 16th, I think gets the Tigers the edge in this one. They then come back home facing off against Texas A&M. And one thing we have to mention here is, of course, A&M will face one of the most difficult schedules in the country. And like South Carolina, they return a lot of talent. Georgia cannot afford to kind of have this hangover after a loss against Auburn. And Kirby Smart has made it very clear that as long as I'm here, we're not going to have hangovers. We're not going to have these little letdown games where we're down on ourselves after a loss. Because their season's not over. That's what happened 2 years ago. Georgia recognized that even though they got annihilated by Auburn, their season wasn't over. They had a lot to play for. And they won out and ended up going to the SEC title game, winning that, and making an appearance in the national title game. They beat A&M angry after a loss on the road against Auburn. Don't doubt Jimbo Fisher and the Aggies this year, but you're not going to see much improvement with road games at Georgia, LSU, Clemson, and of course Alabama out of the West. So Georgia gets the win over the Aggies. And I can almost guarantee they're going to get a win over Georgia Tech. Not to bypass this rivalry game by any means, but Georgia Tech implementing a new offense under Jeff Collins, going away from the option, implementing a pro-style offense. I don't expect that to take off in year 1. I think they'll do better than most people expect, but they're not going to take off and be so dominant in the ACC in year 1. Even though it's on the road, this defense will swallow up the Georgia Tech offense, and Georgia Tech's defense certainly doesn't have what it takes yet to beat the Bulldogs. They get the win, finish the season 11-1. And of course, that's what they finished the regular season the past 2 years. They lost to Auburn 2 years ago, won the SEC championship, only had 2 losses on the season. Lost to LSU last year, made the SEC championship, lost to Alabama, lost to Texas in the Sugar Bowl, finished the season 11-3. This Georgia team, absolutely a college football playoff contender. And at 11-1, with what we would expect to be a rematch against Alabama in the SEC title game, could be good enough, especially if they beat Alabama. No doubt if they beat Alabama, will make the college football playoff. And even if they fall in that game, if it's as close as it was last year, Georgia, with just 2 losses, could very well find their way in for that 4th spot in the playoff. Kirby Smart has this team going in the right direction in Athens. He has had this team going in the right direction the past 2 seasons and will once again be one of the best teams in the SEC and one of the best teams in the entire nation. So guys, as always, thank you for watching us here on YouTube. Go follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Gridiron Expert, and go check out our official website, thegridironexpert.com. Sign up for our newsletter and sign up for our expert picks. For just $30, you will receive every single one of our 2019 college football spread picks, including the postseason. I can promise you that is a deal you do not want to pass up. So join our team. Sign up today only at thegridironexpert.com. And guys, as always, thank you for watching us here on YouTube. Please continue to like, comment, and subscribe. And we will see you next time on The Gridiron Expert.